Have you ever hated someone only to realize that you were completely wrong? Imagine rejecting the perfect person because of your own pride, while believing the sweetest liar you've ever met. That's exactly what happened in one of the greatest love stories ever written. Pride and Prejudice isn't really about romance. It's about how our minds trick us, how first impressions become dangerous, and how pride can blind us just as much as prejudice. This is the unforgettable story of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. And by the end, you'll realize that the biggest villain in the story isn't a person at all. It's human nature. Everything begins in the English countryside, where the Bennet family lives with one overwhelming problem. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have 5 daughters, but not a single son. That wouldn't seem like a disaster today. Back then, it meant everything. Because under English inheritance laws, the family estate cannot pass to the daughters. When Mr. Bennet dies, the house will belong to a distant male relative. If the daughters fail to marry well, they could lose everything. So for Mrs. Bennet, marriage isn't about love, it's survival. Then one day, exciting news spreads through the neighborhood. A wealthy bachelor named Charles Bingley moves into the grand estate of Netherfield. Young, handsome, rich. Exactly the kind of man every mother dreams about. At the first ball, Jane Bennet, the eldest sister, immediately catches Bingley's attention. Their chemistry is effortless. Everyone assumes a wedding is only a matter of time. But Bingley doesn't arrive alone. Standing beside him is his closest friend, Fitzwilliam Darcy. Even richer, even more respected, yet infinitely colder. When invited to dance, Darcy quietly refuses. Then he makes one careless remark, calling Elizabeth Bennet tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. Elizabeth hears every word, in a single sentence. Darcy earns her lifelong contempt. Or so she believes. From that moment on, Elizabeth sees only arrogance whenever Darcy enters the room. Every glance, every silence, every awkward conversation. To her, he is nothing more than a proud man who believes money makes him superior. What she doesn't know is that Darcy cannot stop thinking about her. Unlike the polished women of high society, Elizabeth speaks her mind. She laughs, challenges people, questions authority. She isn't trying to impress anyone. Ironically, that's exactly what impresses Darcy. But before either of them understands their feelings, someone else steps into the story. His name is George Wickham, and he appears to be everything Darcy isn't. Friendly, warm, charming. He tells Elizabeth a heartbreaking story. According to him, Darcy stole an inheritance that Darcy's own father had promised him. He paints himself as an innocent victim, destroyed by a cruel, selfish man. Elizabeth believes every word, not because she has proof, but because the story perfectly matches what she already believes. It's a classic psychological trap. When we dislike someone, we accept any evidence that confirms our opinion. Without realizing it, Elizabeth is becoming a prisoner of her own prejudice. Meanwhile, another tragedy quietly unfolds. Jane and Bingley are falling deeply in love, but Darcy sees something Elizabeth cannot. Jane is so reserved that her feelings are almost invisible. Fearing his friend is about to make a terrible mistake, Darcy convinces Bingley to leave without proposing. To Elizabeth, this is unforgivable. Now Darcy isn't just proud, he's heartless. As if life couldn't become more complicated, Elizabeth receives a marriage proposal from Mr. Collins. He's awkward, self-important, painfully boring, but he also happens to be the man who will inherit the Bennet estate. Accepting him would guarantee Elizabeth financial security for life. She refuses without hesitation. Her decision shocks everyone, because in her world, love is a luxury few women can afford. Soon after, her close friend Charlotte Lucas accepts Mr. Collins' proposal instead. Not because she loves him, but because security matters more than happiness. It's one of Jane Austen's harshest observations about society. Sometimes, people don't marry the person they love. They marry the life they can survive. Months later, Elizabeth unexpectedly meets Darcy again, and then the impossible happens. Darcy proposes. But instead of simply declaring his love, he admits how difficult it has been to love someone beneath his social status. He speaks honestly, but without humility. For Elizabeth, it's the most insulting proposal imaginable. She rejects him completely. Then she unleashes every accusation she's been carrying. You destroyed Jane's happiness. You ruined Wickham's life. You're arrogant, selfish, cruel. Darcy says almost nothing. The next morning, he leaves her a letter. That letter changes everything. Darcy admits he separated Jane and Bingley, not out of malice, but because he truly believed Jane didn't love his friend. Then he reveals the truth about Wickham. Every story Wickham told was a lie. Darcy never stole his inheritance. Wickham had already received a generous settlement and wasted every penny. Worse still, he later tried to elope with Darcy's 15-year-old sister, hoping to steal her fortune. Suddenly, the charming gentleman becomes the villain, and the arrogant gentleman starts looking painfully honest. Elizabeth is devastated, not because Darcy deceived her, because she deceived herself. She finally realizes that her intelligence, her confidence, even her pride in judging people, had blinded her all along. This is the real turning point of the novel, not a romance, a transformation. Months later, Elizabeth visits Darcy's magnificent estate, Pemberley. She expects to see proof of his arrogance. Instead, she hears every servant describe him as generous, responsible, kind. When Darcy unexpectedly arrives, something has changed. He no longer acts distant. He welcomes Elizabeth warmly, introduces her to his shy younger sister, treats her relatives with genuine respect. For the first time, Elizabeth sees the man behind the reputation, and she begins to wonder, had he changed, or had she finally learned to see him clearly? Then disaster strikes. Elizabeth's youngest sister, Lydia, runs away with Wickham. In that society, this isn't just scandalous. It could destroy the reputation of the entire family forever. Any chance Elizabeth has with Darcy seems gone. But behind the scenes, Darcy quietly disappears. Without asking for credit, he searches for the couple, pays Wickham's enormous debts, bribes him into marriage, saves Lydia, protects the Bennet family's future, and tells no one. Elizabeth later discovers the truth. Only then does she understand something profound. The man she thought was proud had always been acting out of responsibility. The man she believed was honest had only been acting. Eventually, Bingley returns. This time, nothing stands between him and Jane. They become engaged at last. Soon afterward, Darcy asks Elizabeth one final question, not with pride, not with superiority, but with humility. This time, Elizabeth says yes, because both of them have changed. Darcy learned that love requires humility. Elizabeth learned that intelligence means questioning your own certainty. Their marriage isn't the reward for finding perfect love. It's the reward for becoming better people. And that's why Pride and Prejudice has survived for more than 2 centuries. Because beneath the romance, Jane Austen wasn't writing about 2 lovers. She was writing about all of us, about how easily we judge, how confidently we assume we're right, and how the greatest obstacle between us and happiness is often the story we tell ourselves about other people.